There are exactly 7 signs that someone is quietly becoming more confident, and the most powerful one looks nothing like confidence at all. It looks like anxiety. It looks like overthinking. It looks like someone sitting in their car for 4 minutes before walking into a place they are not sure they belong. And the reason nobody catches it, the reason most people spend years believing they are falling behind, is that real confidence was never designed to look the way the world told you it would. This video is going to walk you through 6 specific shifts that anxious people go through on the way to genuine psychological confidence. And I need to warn you right now, number 4 is going to sound so obvious that your brain will skip right past it. Don't let it. That one is the whole thing, because here is what you have probably been carrying. You look at someone loud, someone who takes up space without apologizing, someone who seems to move through rooms like they were built for it, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you have decided that is what confidence is. And then you look at yourself, the rehearsing of sentences before you say them, the replaying of conversations afterward, the way your nervous system treats a new situation like a threat, even when you know, logically, that nothing is wrong. And you have decided that you are somewhere behind. You are not behind. You have just been measuring yourself against the wrong thing. Here is what the science actually shows. Dr. Kristin Neff at the University of Texas at Austin, whose research on self-compassion has been cited in over 3,000 peer-reviewed studies, found that individuals who scored highest on internal security, what psychologists define as the stable, non-defensive sense of one's own worth, also reported significantly higher rates of anxiety awareness. Not low anxiety, not the absence of anxiety, awareness of it. In one study, 78% of participants categorized as psychologically secure described their confidence as something they had built slowly and privately, not something they had always had. Hear that? The people who scored highest on genuine confidence were the ones who had the most conscious relationship with their own discomfort. That is not a coincidence. That is the mechanism. Think about the last time you had to do something that made your chest feel tight. A conversation you needed to have, a room you walked into alone, a moment where you had to represent yourself and you felt your body resist. Maybe it was last week, maybe it was this morning. And after it was over, if you survived it, there was probably a quiet voice that said you handled that wrong, or you were too much, or not enough, or that the other person noticed the thing you were trying to hide. That voice is not your enemy. That voice is the beginning of something most people never build. Stay with me, because the next few things I am about to tell you are going to completely reframe what you thought was going wrong. The first shift is called threat appraisal recalibration. Here is what that means in your actual nervous system. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, does not distinguish between physical danger and social rejection. When you walk into a room and feel that spike of anxiety, your brain is running the same chemical sequence it would run if you were being physically threatened, because for most of human evolution, social rejection was a survival threat. Cortisol rises, your attention narrows, you become hypervigilant for signs that you are not welcome. This is not weakness. This is an ancient system doing exactly what it was built to do. The first shift anxious people go through on the way to real confidence is not that this system stops firing, it is that they stop interpreting the firing as evidence of failure. The anxiety starts to become data instead of verdict, and the moment that happens, something in the nervous system begins to reorganize itself around safety rather than threat. You do not need to eliminate the signal. You need to stop letting the signal write the story. The second shift is what psychologists call tolerance of ambiguity. Anxious people have a specific relationship with uncertainty. The brain tries to resolve it immediately, and when it cannot, it fills the gap with the worst available explanation. Why has not that person texted back? Why did that go quiet at the end? Why did they look at me like that? The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for complex reasoning, and the amygdala are in constant communication. And in people with heightened threat sensitivity, the amygdala often wins that conversation, pulling interpretation toward danger. The shift happens when the window between stimulus and conclusion gets slightly wider, not eliminated, wider. You notice the uncertainty, you feel the pull toward the worst explanation, and you hold it there, in the open, without resolving it. That is not passivity. That is the most sophisticated thing a human brain can learn to do. People who have built this capacity feel, from the outside, like they are calm. What is actually happening inside is far more active than anything calm suggests. And this is the part most people skim over, so I want you to actually hear it. The person in the room who looks unbothered is almost never unbothered. They have just stopped outsourcing their sense of safety to the outcome. That is a skill. And anxious people, because of how intensely they have had to track their own inner states, are closer to building it than they realize. The third shift is called identity decoupling. This is where it gets interesting. When we are younger, and for many people well into adulthood, the nervous system links performance to identity. A mistake is not a mistake. It is evidence of who you are. A rejection is not a rejection. It is confirmation of what you feared. The hippocampus, which consolidates memory, and the amygdala, which tags experiences with emotional weight, work together to build a kind of internal case file, a running archive of moments that seem to confirm your worst theory about yourself. What changes in people who develop real confidence is not that they stop making mistakes or stop getting rejected. It is that those events stop being filed as identity evidence. Neuroscientists call this reduced evaluative self-referencing. The brain begins to process failure as information rather than as something that means something about who you permanently are. The practical feeling of this is subtle. It feels like being a little less devastated. It feels like recovering a little faster. It feels like you can hold the hard thing in your hand without it swallowing you whole. That is the shift. It is almost invisible from the outside. And it is everything. The fourth shift, the one I flagged at the beginning, is discomfort participation. And yes, it sounds exactly like what you think it sounds like, which is why your brain wants to skip it. But the mechanism underneath it is not what you expect. When you enter a situation that triggers your threat response and you stay anyway, not because you are not scared, not because you have talked yourself into believing it is safe, but because you choose to be there despite the signal, something happens in the anterior cingulate cortex, the region responsible for error detection and adjustment. It begins to update its prediction, not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, across repeated exposures. The brain's forecast for that category of situation changes. The anxiety does not disappear, it compresses. The ceiling of what feels survivable rises by increments so small you would miss them if you were looking for transformation. You are not looking for transformation. You are looking for 1%. 1% wider, 1% longer, 1% closer to the thing that used to feel impossible. That accumulation, over months, is what people standing on the other side of it describe as confidence. They did not arrive there through certainty. They arrived through repetition. The fifth shift is called social reference point revision. Here is what that means. Human beings are social animals, and social comparison is not a flaw. It is a hardwired cognitive tool. The brain is constantly scanning for where you stand relative to others, because for most of human history, your position in the group determined your access to resources, safety, and connection. Oxytocin, the hormone associated with social bonding, is also tied to threat detection in social hierarchies, which is why feeling below someone else does not just feel uncomfortable, it feels chemically threatening. Anxious people often have a comparison radius that is too wide and too skewed. They are comparing their inner life to other people's outer performance, their private struggle to someone else's public presentation. The shift happens not when comparison stops, it never stops, but when the reference point changes. When the question moves from, how do I compare to them, to, how do I compare to who I was 6 months ago? That shift is not motivational, it is neurological. The threat signal quiets when the comparison is survivable, and you will always survive a comparison to your past self, because you are, by definition, still here. The sixth and final shift is what Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett at Northeastern University calls constructed affect mastery, the ability to consciously participate in how your brain categorizes internal states. Her research, including a landmark 2017 study involving over 200 participants, demonstrated that emotions are not simply things that happen to you, they are predictive constructions. Your brain is constantly predicting what an internal sensation means based on past experience and context. The racing heart before a difficult conversation gets labeled as fear because that is the category your brain has learned to assign it. But the racing heart before something exciting uses the same physiological signal. The difference is the label. The difference is the story. What Barrett's research showed is that people who had larger emotional granularity, who could distinguish between more specific internal states rather than collapsing everything into broad categories like anxious or fine, showed measurably lower physiological reactivity to stresses. They were not less sensitive. They were more precise. And precision in the emotional brain is the closest thing there is to power. This is the shift that quietly changes everything, not the disappearance of anxiety, but the expanding of your vocabulary for it. Not, I am anxious, but I am activated, and my brain is predicting something threatening, and that prediction might be wrong, and I can stay anyway. That is the sentence that took years to build, and the fact that you are here, watching this, trying to understand yourself in this kind of detail, that is not the behavior of someone who is behind. That is the behavior of someone who is already in the middle of building something real. None of this requires a personality change. None of this requires you to become louder or take up more space or perform a version of ease you have never felt. The confidence that anxious people build is quieter than the kind that gets performed on stages or posted in highlight reels. And it is also more durable because it was built inside the actual conditions of your life, not borrowed from someone else's script. You earned every one of these shifts just by surviving the thing that made them necessary. Now, there is one more piece of this, and it lives just below everything we talked about today, because understanding these shifts is only half the picture. The other half is what happens in your relationships while you are building this, and that part is more complicated than most people expect because the people around you were calibrated to the version of you that needed their reassurance. If you do not understand what happens next, you will misread it entirely, and you will think it means you did something wrong, when it actually means you did something right. That is what the next video is about. Do not miss it.